The shovel blades scraped against stone, a sound like a dry throat clearing. Elias felt the vibration travel up the ash handle, through his calloused palms, and into the bones of his arms. He paused, straightened his back, and drew a breath of the sharp autumn air. The hole was 4 feet deep now, a precise rectangle cut into the earth, 20 feet by 30. Beside it, 3 distinct piles of rock and soil stood like patient monuments to his labor. The dark topsoil, the dense clay, and finally, the coarse gravel he had unearthed from the lower strata. His dog Boro, a great quiet animal with the brindled coat of a wolf and the gentle eyes of a saint, lay with his head on his paws at the edge of the pit, watching. He did not pant or whine, he simply watched, a silent, furred witness to the strange undertaking. Boro had been his father's dog, and now he was Elias's shadow. "That's deep enough for a grave, not a foundation." The voice belonged to Mr. Gable, his nearest neighbor, a man whose hands were as gnarled and dependable as the oak trees he felled for a living. He stood beside his wife, his arms crossed over a chest thick with 70 years of hard work and harder winters. Mrs. Gable clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her face a mask of genuine concern. She had known Elias since he was a boy, had brought soup to the house after his father passed last spring. Elias drove the shovel into the loose earth at the bottom of the pit and leaned on it. He looked up at them, his face smudged with dirt, his expression unreadable. "It's a foundation," he said. His voice was quiet, not given to waste. Mr. Gable shook his head, a slow, pitying motion. "Son, a foundation needs to be on solid ground, not in a ditch. You lay your sills on flat stones, just above the frost line. Everyone knows that. What in God's name are you thinking, digging down to China?" He gestured with a thumb toward the largest of the piles. "And all this rock, are you building a house or a quarry?" "I have a plan," Elias said. Mrs. Gable took a step closer, her voice soft with worry. "Elias, dear, your father was a brilliant man, we all know that. A man of books and ideas. But building a house, that's a practical thing. Mr. Gable has built 3 houses in this valley. You should listen to him. Winter isn't a theory. It'll be here before you know it." Elias nodded, acknowledging her kindness without yielding to it. He pulled a worn, leather-bound journal from his back pocket, its pages filled with his father's dense, spidery script and precise ink drawings. He didn't open it. He just held it for a moment, the weight of it a familiar comfort in his palm. "The plan is sound." "A plan for what? A root cellar with a roof?" Mr. Gable scoffed, though there was no malice in it, only the deep-seated certainty of a man who had never been proven wrong about the fundamentals of survival. "You'll have water in there come the first thaw. It'll be a damp, cold tomb. You'll freeze before January." "It won't be damp," Elias stated, turning his attention back to the pit. "It will be warm." The Gables exchanged a look of profound, shared skepticism. Boro, who had lifted his head at their approach, now let it rest back on his paws with a quiet sigh, as if he, too, had heard these arguments before and found them tiresome. Elias squared a corner of the hole with the shovel, the rhythmic scrape and lift of earth resuming its steady beat. The conversation was over. He would not argue. He would simply build. The Gables stood for another minute, watching the young man work with a stubborn, silent intensity that brooked no further advice. Finally, with another shake of his head, Mr. Gable turned and led his wife back toward their own tidy homestead, its thin plume of smoke a testament to proven methods and sensible construction. The work was methodical, a slow conversation between muscle and earth. For the next week, Elias did not build up, but continued to work down. He dug a narrow trench leading away from the pit's lowest point, lining it with rocks to create a French drain that would carry any meltwater far from the house. He spent 2 days hauling stones from the creek bed, his wheelbarrow groaning under the load. He sorted them by size, large, fist-sized rocks for the bottom layer, then smaller, egg-sized gravel, and finally, countless buckets of coarse sand. Boro would often trot alongside him on these trips, his presence a steady rhythm against Elias's own grueling pace. He began to fill the pit. The first layer was a foot of the largest stones, placed carefully to allow for air gaps and drainage. Over this, he poured the smaller gravel, another foot deep, raking it perfectly level. Then came the sand, a 6-inch layer that he watered and tamped until it was as firm as a floor. With each layer, the hole became less of a grave and more of a promise. His hands, already tough, became maps of new calluses, crisscrossed with small, healing cuts. His back ached with a deep, resonant fire that only faded with sleep. One afternoon, as he was wrestling a heavy, flat stone into place for the hearth's foundation, another visitor arrived. This was Mr. Sterling, the man who owned the valley's mill and most of the land besides. He sat astride a handsome bay mare, looking down at Elias from a height of wealth and importance. "Gable tells me you're building your house in a hole in the ground," Sterling said, his voice carrying an edge of amusement. "I had to see this for myself." Elias set the stone, grunting with the effort. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty forearm. "I'm building my house," he said. Sterling chuckled. "It's a novel approach, I'll grant you. Most men try to keep their floors away from the cold earth. You seem intent on marrying them. Wait until winter, son. That ground will suck every bit of warmth out of your bones. It's barbaric." Elias looked at the man on the horse. He thought of his father's journals, the pages filled with calculations on thermal conductivity, on heat retention, on the slow, steady release of stored energy. He thought of the diagrams of ancient Roman hypocausts and Korean ondol heating systems. Barbaric was the last word for it. It was knowledge, ancient and proven. "The ground will be my warmth," he said, his voice even. Sterling laughed outright this time. "Is that what your father's books told you?" "Elias, there's the world in books, and then there's the real world. In the real world, we use a stove and a wood floor. It's worked for 100 years. He gathered his reins. "Don't come to me for a loan when you have to rebuild it properly next spring." With a click of his tongue, he spurred the horse and rode away, leaving Elias alone in his pit with the silent, judging mountains and his one faithful companion. Boro nudged his head under Elias's hand, and Elias scratched the dog's ears, his gaze fixed on the half-finished foundation. He wasn't building for Mr. Sterling or for Mr. Gable. He was building for the winter. And the winter, he knew, did not care for opinions. The next phase of the plan was the most crucial. From the blacksmith, he purchased 20 lengths of 6-inch iron pipe. This earned him another round of questioning, this time from Anya, the blacksmith's daughter. She had her father's strong hands, but a quiet, watchful intelligence that set her apart. She didn't mock. She was simply curious. "What's all this for, Elias?" she asked as he loaded the heavy pipes onto his cart. "A new kind of fence?" "It's for the floor," he said. She tilted her head. Her dark hair was tied back, and smudges of soot highlighted the sharp line of her jaw. "Pipes in the floor?" For the first time, Elias offered more than a short, declarative statement. He took a piece of charcoal from the forge and, on a clean patch of floor, sketched a diagram. He drew the massive stone hearth he planned to build, the large firebox of the iron stove that would sit within it, and then he drew the pipes, snaking from the back of the stove through the layers of gravel before joining a single flue and rising up a chimney at the far end of the house. "The smoke," he explained, his voice low. "The smoke and heat from the fire will travel through the entire floor before it leaves the house. It will heat the stones." Anya stared at the drawing, her brow furrowed in concentration. She traced the path of the pipes with her finger. "So the whole floor becomes the stove?" Elias nodded. "The stones will hold the heat for a long time. A small fire will keep the whole house warm for a day." She looked up from the drawing, her eyes meeting his. In them he saw not dismissal, but a flicker of understanding, of wonder. "My father says it's a fool's errand," she said softly. "He says you're trying to reinvent the house." "I'm just trying to stay warm," Elias replied. He spent the next 2 weeks laying the pipe, setting each piece at a slight, precise incline to ensure a proper draw. He packed sand and smaller stones tightly around them, creating a solid, stable matrix. Then came the final layer, flat, smooth river stones, dark gray and black, each one chosen for its texture and fit. He hauled over 200 wheelbarrow loads from the riverbank a mile away. He laid them one by one, fitting them together like a vast, irregular mosaic, pounding them into the sandbed with a heavy mallet until the surface was level and firm. When he was done, he had a floor unlike any in the valley. It was beautiful in a stark, elemental way. It felt ancient and solid under his feet. It felt like the bedrock of the world. With the floor complete, the rest of the house rose with surprising speed. He had milled the logs the previous autumn with his father, and they were seasoned and ready. He laid the heavy sills, notched the corners, and with the help of a block and tackle, raised the walls. The work was relentless. He worked from the first hint of dawn until the last vestiges of light faded from the sky. Boro lay on the cool stone floor inside the rising walls, a constant, reassuring presence. Anya began to visit regularly, sometimes bringing a loaf of fresh bread or a pail of cool water from her well. She would sit on a log and watch him work, asking quiet questions, her presence a balm against the solitude and the weight of the community's doubt. He built the hearth and chimney with stone from the property, a massive structure that dominated the center of the house. He mortared each stone with care, his father's diagrams showing him how to shape the smoke chamber for a perfect draw. He set the heavy cast-iron stove into its cavity, connecting the flue to his intricate network of pipes. The day he finished the roof, slating it against the coming snows, the first flakes of winter began to drift down from a sky the color of lead. He stood in the doorway of his finished home, a simple, solid structure of log and stone. Inside, the air was still and cold. Boro got to his feet and stretched, his claws making a soft scraping sound on the river stone floor. Elias walked to the great hearth and laid a fire, kindling, then split pine, then a single, solid log of oak. He struck a match. The flame caught, devoured the kindling, and began to lick at the pine. Smoke billowed for a moment, and then, with a soft whoosh, the draft caught, and the smoke disappeared up the stovepipe, beginning its long, warm journey beneath his feet. He spent the first few weeks of winter settling in. He kept the fire small, a constant, modest burn. Just as the journals predicted, the effect was not immediate. For the first 2 days, the house remained chilly. Mr. Gable, stopping by on his way to check his traps, stood in the center of the room and shook his head. "It's like standing in a cave, son. I feel the cold coming right up through my boots. You need a wood floor. Get some planks down before the real deep freeze sets in." "It's working," Elias said, his hand resting on the stone of the hearth, which was just beginning to feel faintly warm to the touch. "It's your funeral," Gable muttered as he left. On the 3rd day, Elias woke to a different world. The air in the cabin was no longer cold and sharp. It was cool, but not cold. A deep, pervasive chill had been banished. He knelt and placed his palm flat on the river stones a few feet from the hearth. They were warm. Not hot, but radiating a gentle, persistent warmth. He moved to the far corner of the room, 25 feet from the fire. He pressed his hand to the floor. It was warm there, too. Burro, who usually curled into a tight ball to sleep, was stretched out on his side, his belly exposed to the rising heat, slumbering peacefully. Over the next week, the temperature outside plummeted. The snows came, day after day, burying the valley in a blanket of white. The wind howled, a physical presence that battered the walls and rattled the window panes of the other houses. Through it all, Elias's cabin remained an island of calm, steady warmth. He fed the stove only 3 times a day, with a few small logs each time. The massive thermal battery beneath his feet did the rest. The river stones were now a constant 18 degrees Celsius, and the air in the single large room was comfortable enough for him to work in his shirt sleeves. The floor, once a symbol of his foolishness, had become a silent, radiant engine of comfort. He thought he would be left alone, but the valley was a small place, and curiosity was a powerful force. One afternoon, Mrs. Gable knocked on his door, a basket of preserves in her hands. "Just checking on you, dear," she said, her breath pluming in the frigid air. "We were worried." Elias stepped back and held the door open. "Come in." She stepped inside and stopped, her words catching in her throat. She looked from the small, calmly burning fire to Elias, who wore no heavy coat. Her gaze fell to the floor. She slowly unwrapped her shawl, her eyes wide. "But how?" she whispered. "Your fire is so small. Our stove has been roaring day and night, and we can still see our breath in the parlor." "It's the floor," Elias said simply. He gestured for her to sit at the simple wooden table he had built. "It holds the heat." She walked hesitantly to the center of the room, as if testing the ice on a pond. She looked down at her thick-soled boots. "I don't understand," she said, but the doubt was gone from her voice, replaced by awe. It's a miracle." The news spread. Mr. Gable came next, his skepticism warring with his wife's testimony. He stomped the snow from his boots and entered, his face a study in begrudging curiosity. He walked the perimeter of the room, touching the walls, the windows. Then finally, he knelt down, pulled off a mitten, and placed his bare, gnarled hand flat on the stone floor. He held it there for a long time, his expression unreadable. When he finally stood up, he looked at Elias, and for the first time, the younger man saw not pity, but a profound and unsettling respect. "I'll be damned," Mr. Gable said, his voice a low rumble. "The boy was right." That winter was spoken of for generations afterward. They called it the year of the great blizzard. It began not with a fury, but with a deceptive calm. A week of impossibly deep cold, where the temperature dropped to 40 below and stayed there. The sky was a pale, merciless blue. The very air seemed to crackle. Trees, their sap frozen solid, exploded in the forest with reports like rifle shots. Houses that had stood for 50 winters began to fail. Wood contracted, letting in drafts. Stoves, fed to their absolute limit, could not combat the penetrating cold that leached through the floors and walls. Firewood supplies, meant to last until March, were dwindling by mid-January. The first to come were the Gables. Mr. Gable appeared at Elias's door one evening, his face grim, his wife huddled behind him. He did not look at Elias directly. "Our wood is low," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "And the house, it won't hold the heat. We can't keep the baby warm." He referred to their youngest grandchild, who was staying with them. Elias just nodded and stepped aside. "Bring him here." They came in, their relief a palpable thing as the steady, radiant warmth enveloped them. Mrs. Gable began to weep silently, holding the bundled infant. Mr. Gable stood by the small, placid fire, staring at it as if it defied all the laws of nature he held sacred. "We laughed at you," he said, his back to Elias. "I called you a fool." "The floor is warm," Elias said. "That's all that matters." Within a day, 2 more families had arrived, their own homes becoming uninhabitable iceboxes. Elias's single room became a small, huddled village. The children slept on blankets on the warmest part of the floor, near the hearth. The adults sat along the walls, speaking in low, hushed tones. There was no panic, only a quiet, stunned gratitude. Burro moved among the newcomers, a calming presence, allowing the children to bury their cold hands in his thick fur. Anya arrived with her father, carrying what food they had left. Her eyes met Elias's across the crowded room, and she gave him a small, weary smile that held all the acknowledgement he would ever need. The final test came on the 3rd night. The wind rose to a gale, driving snow with such force that it seemed to be trying to dismantle the world. A frantic pounding came at the door. Elias opened it to a figure crusted in snow, barely recognizable as one of Mr. Sterling's farmhands. "The main house," the man gasped, his words torn away by the wind. "The big window in the master bedroom blew in. The fires are out. We can't get them lit again. Mr. Sterling, his wife, they're freezing." Elias pulled on his coat and handed a lantern to Mr. Gable. "We'll bring them back." The journey to the Sterling house, though less than half a mile, was a life-threatening ordeal. They found the grand home in a state of chaos. The opulent parlor was as cold as a tomb, its fine furniture coated in a layer of wind-driven snow. In the bedroom, Sterling and his wife were huddled under a mountain of blankets, their faces pale and bluish. Sterling, the man who had laughed from atop his fine horse, looked at Elias with eyes full of desperation and shame. "My house, it's failed," he stammered, his teeth chattering. "Mine hasn't," Elias said, his voice calm and steady in the howling wind. "Let's go." They half-carried the Sterlings back to the small cabin. When they entered, the sudden transition from the Arctic violence outside to the serene, steady warmth within was so profound that Mrs. Sterling fainted. Mr. Sterling stood, swaying, in the middle of the room, looking at the faces of his neighbors, the people who worked his land, milled his grain, and shod his horses, all safe, all warm, because of the one man he had openly ridiculed. He looked at the strange, dark stone floor, the source of this impossible salvation. He looked at Elias, who was quietly adding a single log to the fire. "I called it barbaric," Sterling whispered, his voice cracking. Elias turned from the stove. He met the man's gaze. "It works," he said, and in that simple statement there was no triumph, no "I told you so." There was only the quiet, unassailable truth of a thing that was built correctly. The blizzard raged for 2 more days. In the small cabin, a community was forged. They shared their dwindling food, told stories, and cared for one another's children. The house, built for one man and his dog, became an ark for 23 souls. The gravel floor, the great thermal heart of the home, never faltered. It radiated its gentle, life-sustaining heat, a silent testament to the unconventional wisdom of a quiet boy and his father's books. When the storm finally broke and a weak sun shone on a world transformed by snow, the people emerged not into the ruin of their settlement, but into the beginning of a new one, founded on the humbling realization that the strongest walls were not always the thickest, and the greatest warmth did not always come from the biggest fire. In the aftermath of the Great Blizzard, the valley was remade. The event became a line in their history, a point from which all things were measured. No one ever spoke of Elias's barbaric floor again, except in tones of reverence. That spring, 3 families came to him, not with advice but with requests. They wanted to build new homes or rebuild their old ones, and they wanted to build them on a foundation of warm stone. Elias did not become a loud man or a boastful one. His nature had not changed. But he became a teacher. With his father's journal laid open on a workbench, he showed them the principles. He explained the necessity of the depth, the importance of the drainage, the precise slope of the pipes, the way the stones stored and released the sun's energy captured in wood. He did not charge for his knowledge. It was a legacy, and it belonged to the community that had nearly perished for the lack of it. Mr. Gable was his first and most devoted student. The old woodsman, humbled and renewed, worked alongside Elias to dig the pit for his new home, his earlier mockery replaced by a quiet, focused attention to every detail. Mr. Sterling, in a public act of penance and gratitude, funded the purchase of all the iron pipe needed for any family who wished to rebuild, his wealth finally being put to the service of his community's true survival. Anya worked beside Elias through it all. She learned the drawings as well as he knew them, her sharp mind grasping the physics of convection and thermal mass. They were married the following autumn, in a ceremony held in the open air, the entire valley in attendance. They moved a larger bed into the small cabin, but the house itself needed no other change. It was already a perfect home. Years passed. The settlement grew, and it grew resilient. The new houses, with their dark, warm floors, faced the winters not with trepidation, but with a quiet confidence. Children were born who had never known the bone-deep chill that their parents had once accepted as an unavoidable fact of life. They played on the warm stone floors in the dead of winter, their world shaped by an idea that had once been an object of ridicule. Elias and Anya raised 2 children of their own in the little cabin. They grew up learning to read from their grandfather's journals, understanding that true wisdom was often quiet and always patient. Boro grew old. His brindled muzzle turned gray, and his steps became slow and deliberate. He spent most of his days sleeping on the stones before the hearth, in the spot where the warmth was deepest. One winter morning, when Boro was 14, he did not get up to greet Elias. He had passed in his sleep, curled in his favorite spot, his long life of faithful witness complete. Elias carried his old friend out into the snow-covered yard and buried him beneath the tall pine tree where Boro had spent so many summer afternoons watching him work. There was no ceremony, only a quiet moment of farewell between a man and the companion who had believed in him from the very first shovelful of dirt. The grief was a physical weight, but like the house, Elias was built to endure. More time slipped by, measured in seasons and the growth of children. Elias's hair turned the color of winter frost. His hands, though still strong, bore the permanent marks of a life of labor. He became an elder, a man of few words but immense authority. When newcomers arrived in the valley, they were told his story, and they would look at the quiet, unassuming man with a sense of awe, as if he were a figure from a legend. He always seemed mildly uncomfortable with the attention. The work had been the point, not the praise. The solution had been the reward, not the vindication. When Anya passed, it was peacefully, in the bed they had shared for nearly 50 years. The entire valley mourned with him. He lived on for another 5 years, a fixture in the home he had built, a living reminder of their shared history. He spent his days sitting by the fire, his father's journals in his lap, the warm floor a constant, comforting presence beneath his feet. He died in his 87th year, on a cold winter's day much like the one that had defined his life. He was found in his chair, a peaceful expression on his face, the stove burning low and steady, the house filled with its gentle, radiant warmth. They buried him on the hill overlooking the settlement, next to Anya, in a spot where he could forever watch over the homes he had helped make safe. The town commissioned a simple stone marker, cut from the same river rock he had used for his floor. Mr. Gable's great-grandson, a stonemason, carved the inscription. It did not mention his name or the dates of his life. It simply said, "He built on a firm foundation, and his warmth sheltered us all." Decades later, the valley was a thriving town. The original cabin still stood, preserved as a historical building. School children were sometimes brought there on field trips. They would take off their shoes and marvel at the feel of the warm stone floor, trying to imagine the great blizzard their ancestors spoke of. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young girl with dark hair, a descendant of Elias and Anya, sat on that floor with a book. The light streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house was quiet, filled with a sense of profound and enduring peace. Outside, the wind began to pick up, a familiar herald of the coming cold. But inside, resting on the deep, dark heart of the home, the girl felt only a gentle, unwavering warmth, a legacy of stone and wisdom radiating up from the earth.